Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is all about replacing the rear brake pads on the Triumph bobber. So first thing is first, get your bike up on a paddock stand. If you don't know how to use a paddock stand, I've got a video out in my YouTube channel. Check it out. Teaches you how to use the front and the back paddock stand. Makes servicing and maintenance so much easier. So my bike's done about 16,000 kilometers in total. And I noticed the other day that my rear brake pads were already up to the indicator line. And I probably had about 1 millimeter of brake material left. Right, so this is the brake caliper that we're going to be working with. It's a Nissan brake caliper. So I wanted to cover another area. So this is the place where you check your brake fluid levels for your rear brakes and also the coolant level for the engine. You can remove the cap and actually see what's going on inside there, but sometimes the view is a bit small. So to make it easier, I kind of like to remove the panel. To remove the panel, you're going to need an 8mm socket and you got to remove 4 bolts. The reason why I wanted to cover this area was I wanted to show you how much of the brake fluid goes back into the brake reservoir when you push the piston back in. So what happens is when your brake pads start to wear down, your piston has to come out a little bit more, and that in turn makes the fluid in the reservoir go down. But when you put new brake pads on, you're going to have to push the pistons back in, and that will raise the brake fluid in the reservoir again. So if you haven't topped it up before, it'll be okay. But if you topped it up over time, when you do this service, it's going to overflow. So to prevent it from overflowing, it's good to know where the reservoir is, and so that you can open up the cap, remove the bladder, and then maybe remove some liquid from the reservoir. Over here I'm just cleaning up the reservoir a little bit. It's looking a little bit dirty, so just to make it look a little bit more presentable and easier to look at. You can see from the overlay what a difference it made. You can see that the liquid in the brake reservoir is already at its lowest level. And this is before we replace the brake pads. So pay attention to this. See what happens when we push the piston back and replace the new brake pads. Right, let's get on with it. Getting the caliper off is pretty easy. So first thing you got to do is remove the weather cap for the retaining bolt, and you're going to need a screwdriver, flathead screwdriver. And you're also going to need a 14mm socket for the lower bolt. And you'll need a 12mm socket for the upper bolt. As far as I know, there's no actual sequence for this, so work on whichever one you want to start with. So I'm going to start with the cap that goes over the retaining bolt. And I don't know what the purpose of this is. I think it's just to keep the weather out of this, like water and stuff like that, to get under the cap. It's a tiny little piece. Be very gentle, don't damage it. Put it somewhere safe so you don't lose it. After you remove the cap, you're going to need a 5mm hex key to loosen up the retaining bolt for the brake pads. I find it easier to loosen up the retaining pin while the caliper is still on the bike. You might want to do this as well. And don't undo it all the way, just loosen it so that's easy to remove later on. Now that the retaining pin is already sorted out, you can get started on the upper bolt using a 12mm socket. So once you've loosened up the upper bolt, grab the 14mm socket and loosen the lower bolt as well. Make sure you're hanging on to the caliper when you're taking out the last bolt before you remove it. There's a good chance that it might just fall and damage it, but in this particular case, it didn't really fall. And then once both bracket bolts are removed, you can just slide the caliper right out. Once you've got the caliper out, you can probably just undo the cable clips. They kind of restrict your movement a little bit, so once you undo them, you have a little bit more flexibility with the caliper. Now that you have the caliper out, just go ahead and remove the retaining pin completely. So if you like the content so far, do me a favor, please press the like button and the subscribe. That will really help the channel out a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks for your support. Now you've got the retaining pin out, the brake pads should just fall right out. There you go. Right inside the caliper there is a spring, so just carefully remove it, kind of take note as to how it went in or came out. You're going to clean the caliper anyway, so you might as well take the spring out and clean that too. So I wanted to just take a moment over here and make a comparison to have a look at the old brake pads, and you can see from one of the pads the wear is almost all the way through to the indicator line already, and one side's almost gone and the other side's got a little bit more meat on it. So here's a new set, and I'm just going to put them side to side so that you can actually see what the difference is. So roughly just over 16,000 kilometers. I expected them to last a little bit longer than that. Maybe I've got another 1,000 kilometers on these old brake pads, but they look like they're due for a change anyways. I felt the difference every time I step on my back brake. It's a lot more spongy now, so obviously it's, you know, it's worn out. I can still ride with it quite comfortably and I still get a lot of stopping power, but I guess when it's time to change, it's time to change. Just be super careful with the brake pads. You're going to be working around with lubricants and grease. Just don't get any of that stuff on the braking material. You don't want to contaminate it, so just be careful. Right, so now we've got everything off. We've got the caliper off, we've got the brake pads out. It's time to do some cleaning. So I'm going to start off with cleaning the brake rotor, and I just use a normal disc brake cleaner. And I'm going to use a Brillo pad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray the brake cleaner on the rotors on both sides, the front and back, and I'll use the Brillo pad and I'll spin the wheel, and that should just get rid of any contamination on the disc. So after scrubbing it for a little while with the Brillo pad, I'm just going to take a clean cloth and I'm just going to spin it around the disc, and I'm going to keep doing it until I don't get any more stains on the cloth. Cleaning the components for the brake caliper is pretty straightforward, nothing too complicated. So I use a combination of the brake cleaner and a solution of just water and washing detergent, and I have a little toothbrush. So what I do is I spray the brake cleaner on, and that removes the brake dust quite easily. And then for the more stubborn stains, I use the dishwashing solution and a toothbrush just to give it a bit of a scrub, and I'll clean all the bolts and everything, and of course dry them up once I'm done. It's pretty straightforward, just make sure everything's dry when you're done. So you can see from just scrubbing it and using the brake cleaner and just using a solution, you can get everything looking brand new. Right, so after you dry it off and stuff like that, you can see, I mean, just looking at the piston over here, it's just shiny, completely different from when I first took it out. Just give it a quick once over, make sure there's no damage to the piston and nothing's gonna get the piston stuck. It's almost time to put everything back together again. So I use a little bit of anti-seize on all the threads of all the bolts and pieces over here. I even smear a little bit onto the piston just to make sure that nothing's gonna get stuck. We do get a lot of rain over here, so tons of grime and potential of rust. So it's always good to put a little bit of lubricant onto some of the parts. Realistically, you don't have to do this, but I do. So you just smear a good amount of anti-seize onto the thread of the retaining bolt and the bracket bolts. This will prevent the thread from locking up in the future. I got this really cool device over here. It helps me push the piston back into its slot. I think it was really cheap. I think it was probably about $5 or maybe even less. And I got it from Shopee. So you put it into the caliper over here, and all you do is just wind the vice. It's like a vice that works in the opposite direction, and it just helps me push the piston back into its slot. It really doesn't matter if you don't have this tool. If you don't have it and you want to push the piston back, you can easily use a screwdriver or the old brake pad, put it back in the caliper, and just brute force it back in. So after pushing the piston back in, it's going to squeeze a little bit of the excess grease off that I put on. So I'm just cleaning it off and make sure that's all nice and tidy. Let's go back to the brake reservoir that's sitting on top of the coolant reservoir, and you can see after pushing the piston back in that the fluid's back up at the top level. I didn't have to fill it up at all. Alright, so the assembly of the caliper. So grab the spring and then just fit it back in there. Remember the way it's supposed to go in. It doesn't really clip in, it just sort of like lays inside the slot over there. I've got some high temperature grease over here, so I'm just gonna rub a little bit of grease onto the retaining pin just on the part where there's no thread, and that's the part that the brake pads slide back and forth on, just to make it a little bit smoother. And this is the part that confused me a little bit. I saw a couple of mechanics, they actually put a little bit of grease on the back of the brake pad, and it's not on both brake pads, it's on the brake pad that leans against the piston. So if you know the answer why people do this, please drop me a comment and tell me why. Now that all the preparation is done, it's time to put the caliper back together again. So I take the first brake pad, the one that has a bit of grease on the back of it, I lean it against the piston. Then I take the second brake pad and then I slide it in there. Just with one hand I try to balance it, and I get the retaining pin and I slide it through the hole and through both brake pads, and then you just secure it, just hand tight for the time being. Now that the brake caliper is ready, it's time to slide it back over the brake rotor. So it's pretty easy. Just make sure that both brake pads are separated and there's enough room to slide over the rotor. And then once you do that, just make sure that both holes are lined up. There are some rubber grommets on the bracket. Just make sure they're not squashed or bent. And then you get the bracket bolts and you slide it in. For the time being, just hand tight both bolts, because you're gonna have to torque it in later. Now that you've got both bolts in, just give the wheel a bit of a spin, make sure nothing's catching, everything's running smoothly. Time to torque everything down. So for the lower bolt, 29 Newton meters. And for the upper bolt, 24 Newton meters. Next is the retaining pin. That's going to be 18 Newton meters. Don't forget to put a little bit of anti-seize on the, I call it the weather cap for the retaining pin, just to make sure that it doesn't get stuck in the future. And for this one, I think just screw it in until it's just hand tight. A little bit more than hand tight, but just don't overdo it. There you have it, it's almost done. Okay, so last thing to do is to make sure that your brake pads or your caliper is working. So don't forget to pump your back brakes. Do it a couple of times until it's nice and stiff, and then test out your back wheel. Make sure it stops when you press on the back brake. And there you have it. We're at the end of our video right now. And as usual, if you like this type of content, you know, it would do me a big favor if you press the like button or subscribe to this channel. It would really help me out a lot. Thanks for your support. Just a reminder, I'm not a mechanic. Most of this stuff I just learned from service manuals or YouTube. And for example, when I got my brake pads, I wanted to find a video on YouTube on how to change the brake pads for the bobber, and I could not find anything. Most of the times it was different bikes, different styles of calipers, and I was getting a little bit confused. I do this all for fun, so I hope you find this video useful. Don't forget to catch my next video where I will show you how I change the front brake pads for my Triumph bobber. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.